My family kicked me out after my sister framed me. Years later, I returned with a Christmas gift, destroyed their perfect world in front of everyone. 7 years of silence can either break you or teach you that some truths are worth waiting for. My name is Amelia Collins, and I'm 25 years old, working as a university library assistant in a small college town 3 states away from where I grew up. Most people see me as the quiet girl who keeps to herself, always buried in books, living alone in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment above the local bakery. What they don't know is that I wasn't always this solitary person who flinches at loud voices and avoids family gatherings like the plague. I used to have parents who tucked me in at night, and a sister who I shared secrets with under blanket forts. Victoria was 2 years older, with golden hair that caught sunlight like spun silk and eyes the color of summer sky. Everyone always said she was the pretty one, the charming one, the one destined for greatness. And I was fine with that, really I was. I was content being the bookish younger sister, the one who got good grades while Victoria got the spotlight. But even back then, there were signs I should have noticed. The way Victoria's tears could instantly change our parents' minds about any punishment. How her version of events was always believed without question, while mine required evidence and witnesses. When Victoria accidentally broke Mom's favorite vase and blamed it on me, I spent a week grounded while she got ice cream for being honest about witnessing my clumsiness. When I found her diary where she wrote about stealing $20 from Dad's wallet, she convinced our parents I had planted it there out of jealousy. The pattern was so subtle, so perfectly orchestrated, that I began to doubt my own memories. Maybe I was the problem child. Maybe I was jealous of my perfect sister. Maybe I really was as unreliable as they seemed to think I was. Our house was a modest 2-story colonial in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. Dad worked at the local insurance company. Mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school, and we were the picture of middle-class respectability. Victoria thrived in this environment, becoming the golden child who could do no wrong, while I retreated more and more into books and silence. The summer I turned 18 should have been filled with college preparations and excitement about my future. I had been accepted to State University on a partial academic scholarship, and my parents had been saving money in their safe for years to cover the rest. $5,000, kept in cash because Dad didn't trust banks after the 2008 financial crisis. I knew about the money because Mom had shown it to me once, explaining how they had sacrificed small luxuries for years to give both Victoria and me a chance at higher education. That's when everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning in July, when Mom discovered the money was gone. Her scream echoed through the house like a wounded animal, and Dad came running from his home office, still holding his morning coffee. I remember rushing downstairs in my pajamas, my heart pounding because I had never heard my mother make such a sound. The safe was open, papers scattered everywhere, and the envelope that should have contained $5,000 was empty. Mom was hyperventilating, clutching the empty envelope to her chest, while Dad stood frozen in the doorway. Victoria appeared beside me, her face pale with what I thought was shock but now recognized as fear. "Someone broke in," I said, the first logical explanation that came to mind. "We should call the police." But Victoria stepped forward, her voice trembling with what seemed like reluctance. "Mom, Dad, I think I saw something." The way she hesitated, the way she looked at me with those big blue eyes filled with tears, should have been my first warning. But I was 18 and naive, and I couldn't imagine that my own sister would destroy my life with a carefully crafted lie. "I saw Amelia coming out of your room last night," Victoria whispered, her voice breaking. She was holding something, and when she saw me, she looked guilty. I didn't want to believe it, but the silence that followed was deafening. I felt the world tilt sideways as 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, and I saw my future crumbling in real time. "That's not true," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I felt. "Victoria, why would you say that? You know I would never." "She's been so stressed about college," Victoria continued, tears now streaming down her cheeks. And I heard her on the phone with her friend Sarah, talking about how unfair it was that I got the car for my birthday while she had to work part-time to save money. Maybe she thought she deserved it more. I stared at my sister in complete disbelief. Every word was a masterpiece of manipulation, mixing just enough truth with devastating lies to create a story that sounded plausible. I had complained to Sarah about Victoria getting the car. I had been stressed about college finances. But I had never, ever stolen from my own family. I didn't take the money, I said, looking directly at my parents. Mom, Dad, you know me. You know I wouldn't do this. But I could see in their faces that Victoria's version was already taking root. Dad's jaw was clenched, his disappointment radiating across the room like heat. Mom was looking at me like I was a stranger, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Amelia, Dad said quietly, just tell us the truth. If you made a mistake, we can work through this as a family. I am telling the truth. My voice cracked with desperation. I didn't take the money. Why would I steal from you when I know how hard you've worked to save it? Victoria sobbed harder, and Mom immediately wrapped her arms around her, shooting me an accusatory glare. Don't make this worse by lying, Mom said coldly. Victoria saw you. She's trying to protect you, and you're making her feel terrible for doing the right thing. I felt like I was drowning in quicksand. Every word I spoke to defend myself only seemed to make things worse. Victoria had positioned herself as the reluctant witness, the loving sister who was heartbroken to reveal her sibling's betrayal. And I was cast as the ungrateful daughter who had stolen her family's future and then lied about it. I want you to think very carefully about what you're going to say next, Dad said, his voice filled with a disappointment so profound it felt like a physical blow. Because once you lie to us about this, there's no coming back from it. I looked around the room at the three people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I realized that no matter what I said, they had already decided I was guilty. Victoria's tears, her perfectly crafted story, her reputation as the truthful daughter had sealed my fate before I even knew I was on trial. I didn't take the money, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I swear on everything I love, I didn't take it. The silence that followed felt like a death sentence. Dad walked to the front door and opened it, his back rigid with anger and disappointment. Get out, he said without turning around. Pack your things and get out of my house. Dad, please, now. His voice exploded through the house, and I saw Victoria flinch dramatically, which only made Mom hold her tighter. I ran upstairs, my hands shaking as I threw clothes into a duffel bag. I could hear Victoria's continued sobs downstairs, punctuated by Mom's comforting murmurs and Dad's angry pacing. 20 minutes later, I was standing on the front porch with everything I owned in 2 bags, staring at the closed door of the only home I had ever known. That was 7 years ago, and in all that time, not one member of my family reached out to me. Not on my birthday, not on holidays, not even when I sent a letter explaining that I had found a job and an apartment and was trying to rebuild my life. My phone calls went unanswered. My letters returned unopened. My existence erased as completely as if I had never been born. I worked 3 jobs that first year just to survive. I cleaned offices at night, waited tables during lunch rushes, and stocked shelves at a grocery store on weekends. The partial scholarship to State University evaporated when I couldn't come up with the remaining tuition, and I watched my dreams of higher education slip away along with everything else I had lost. But I survived. More than that, I persevered. I enrolled in community college part-time, working toward my degree 1 class at a time. I read voraciously, educating myself on subjects that fascinated me, turning my love of books into a marketable skill. 3 years ago, I finally earned my bachelor's degree in library science, and 6 months later, I landed my current job at Millfield University. Meanwhile, Victoria's life bloomed like a hothouse flower. I couldn't help but follow her success through social media, watching from afar as she used the money that should have been mine to launch her influencer career. She started with fashion and lifestyle content. Her natural charisma and our parents' continued financial support, allowing her to create the kind of polished, enviable online presence that attracts thousands of followers. Her Instagram account, Victoria Collins Style, now has over 200,000 followers. She travels to fashion weeks in New York and Paris, partners with luxury brands, and lives in a downtown loft that costs more per month than I make in 3. In every photo she looks radiant and successful, the golden child who never put a foot wrong. Our parents appear in her content regularly, beaming with pride as they attend her brand launch parties and sponsored events. Dad retired early, and I've heard through mutual acquaintances that he and Mom spend their time traveling to visit Victoria and helping manage her business affairs. They rebuilt their savings, bought a new house, and created a life that had no room in it for their younger daughter. I told myself I didn't care. I built a quiet life filled with books and solitude, convincing myself that I was better off without people who could discard me so easily. I dated occasionally, but relationships felt complicated when you had to explain why you never mentioned your family, or why you spent holidays alone. Most people couldn't understand how parents could simply stop loving a child, and honestly, neither could I. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in December, addressed in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. Grandma Rose, my father's mother, was the only family member who had maintained any contact with me over the years. She sent birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, and Christmas gifts that somehow always found their way to my current address, even when I moved and forgot to tell anyone where I was going. Annual Christmas Eve gathering, the invitation read in her elegant script. 4 p.m. at Rose Hill Manor, family only. Please come, dear, it's important. I stared at that invitation for 3 days before deciding to attend. Part of me was curious to see how Victoria and my parents would react to my presence. Part of me hoped that maybe, after 7 years, someone might be ready to listen to my side of the story. But mostly, I was going because Grandma Rose had never asked me for anything, and the word important in her handwriting felt like a lifeline I couldn't ignore. Rose Hill Manor was my grandmother's pride and joy, a Victorian mansion that had been in our family for 4 generations. As I drove up the circular driveway on Christmas Eve, I could see warm light spilling from every window, and cars I recognized from my childhood parked along the tree-lined path. My hands were trembling as I turned off the engine, and I sat in my car for several minutes, trying to build up the courage to walk through that front door. When I finally knocked, Grandma Rose answered immediately, as if she had been waiting by the window. At 83, she was still elegant and sharp-eyed, though her silver hair was now completely white and her frame more fragile than I remembered. "Amelia," she said simply, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and vanilla, "I'm so glad you came." As we walked into the main parlor, conversation stopped like someone had pressed a pause button. Victoria was perched on the antique settee, looking stunning in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Our parents flanked her like bodyguards, Dad in his best suit, and Mom wearing the pearl necklace that had belonged to my great-grandmother. There were perhaps 15 relatives scattered around the room, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Everyone was staring at me like I was a ghost who had materialized in their midst, which I suppose was accurate enough. "Hello?" I said quietly, remaining near the doorway in case I needed to make a quick escape. Victoria's face had gone pale, and she was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Mom looked like she might faint, while Dad's expression was unreadable. The silence stretched on until Grandma Rose clapped her hands together sharply. "Well," she announced, "now that we're all here, I believe it's time for the gift exchange." For the next hour we went through the motions of a normal family Christmas. Presents were opened, conversations resumed, and I found myself relegated to a corner chair, largely ignored except for polite nods from relatives who seemed unsure how to navigate the obvious tension. Victoria held court in the center of the room, regaling everyone with stories of her latest brand partnerships and upcoming projects. I was preparing to make my excuses and leave when Grandma Rose stood up, her cane tapping against the hardwood floor to get everyone's attention. "Before anyone goes," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been the family matriarch for decades, "I have one more gift to distribute. Actually, it's not from me, it's from someone who couldn't be here tonight." She walked to the enormous Christmas tree and retrieved a medium-sized box wrapped in brown paper with no decorative ribbon or bow. The box looked old, like it had been sitting in storage for years. "This is from Richard," she said, and the room went completely silent. Richard was my father's name, but everyone called him Rich. The only person who had ever called him Richard was his own father, my grandfather, who had died when I was 12. "I don't understand," Dad said, standing up from his chair. "What do you mean it's from Richard?" Grandma Rose's eyes twinkled with something that might have been mischief, but her voice was steady and serious. "Your father left specific instructions that this box was to be opened at a family Christmas gathering, but only when certain conditions were met. Those conditions have now been fulfilled." She looked directly at me and I felt a chill run down my spine. The conditions were that all of his grandchildren had to be present, and at least one of them had to have been cast out and proven worthy through adversity. His words, not mine. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Grandpa Richard had been a lawyer, methodical and precise in everything he did. If he had left instructions about a gift, there was a reason for it. "Amelia," Grandma Rose said, holding out the box to me, "this is for you to open." I stood up on shaking legs and walked to the center of the room, very aware that every eye was focused on me. The box was heavier than it looked, and when I shook it gently I could hear papers rustling inside. "Go ahead, dear," Grandma Rose encouraged. "It's time." I untied the string and pulled away the brown paper, revealing a plain wooden box with a brass latch. Inside, I found a collection of items that made my breath catch in my throat. A letter addressed to me in my grandfather's handwriting, a small digital recorder, and underneath those, a stack of bank statements and receipts that seemed to date back 7 years. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the letter and began to read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "My dearest Amelia, if you are reading this, then several things have happened. You have been wrongly accused of something, cast out from your family, and you have survived long enough to prove your character through your actions rather than your words. I have watched this family for 78 years, and I have learned to recognize patterns that others prefer to ignore." I looked up to see Victoria's face had gone completely white, and she was staring at the digital recorder like it was a venomous snake. I continued reading. "The night before the money went missing from your parents' safe, I couldn't sleep due to my medication. So I was sitting in the garden when I heard Victoria on her phone in the kitchen. The window was open, and her voice carried clearly. She was crying, talking to someone about gambling debts she had accumulated online, debts that totaled exactly $5,000. She begged whoever she was speaking with for more time, promising she would have the money within 24 hours. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Victoria made a small choking sound, but no one looked at her. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for me to continue. I knew then what was going to happen, but I was a sick old man with no proof except my own ears. I decided to gather evidence, hoping I would never need to use it. The next morning, I set up a small recording device in the kitchen, hidden behind the coffee maker. What I captured is on the digital recorder in this box. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the letter, but I forced myself to keep reading. I also hired a private investigator to trace Victoria's online activities and financial transactions. The bank statements and receipts in this box will show that she had been gambling online for months before the theft, accumulating debts that she couldn't pay. The night after the money disappeared, she paid off those exact debts using cash deposits at 3 different ATMs around town. I set the letter down and picked up the digital recorder, my finger hovering over the play button. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Don't," she said, her voice cracking. "Please, Amelia, don't do this." But I pressed play, and my grandfather's voice filled the room, explaining what we were about to hear. Then came Victoria's voice, crystal clear despite the age of the recording. I know, I'm a horrible person. But it's not like they're poor, and Amelia's always been the favorite anyway, even though everyone pretends it's me. They'll blame her because she's been acting weird about college money. And honestly, she probably won't even fight it. She never fights for anything." There was a pause, then Victoria's voice again. "I'll take the money tonight after everyone's asleep. Mom and Dad will never suspect me, and if I play it right they'll think Amelia took it. She's been complaining about how much money they spent on my car, so it's perfect. Everyone will believe she finally snapped and took what she thought she deserved." The recording continued for several more minutes, with Victoria detailing exactly how she planned to frame me, how she would act shocked and reluctant to accuse her sister, how she would cry and appear heartbroken while destroying my life. When it ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Victoria had sunk back into her chair, tears streaming down her face, but these weren't the manipulative tears I remembered from 7 years ago. These were the tears of someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. "Victoria," Dad said, his voice hollow and strange. "Is this true?" She looked up at him, and for the first time in her life she couldn't summon a lie that would save her. "Daddy, I was young and stupid and I was scared. Is this true?" he roared, and everyone in the room flinched. Victoria nodded, her sobs echoing through the room. Yes, it's true. I took the money and I let you blame Amelia because I was too much of a coward to admit what I had done. Mom was staring at her older daughter like she was seeing her for the first time. You let us throw your sister out of our home. You let us cut her out of our lives. You watched us suffer thinking we had raised a thief and you said nothing. I wanted to tell you, Victoria cried. But then it had gone on for so long, and Amelia seemed to be doing okay, and I thought maybe it was better to just leave things alone. Better for who? I asked, speaking for the first time since reading the letter. My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. Better for you because you got to keep living your perfect life while I worked 3 jobs just to survive? Better for you because you got to use the money that should have paid for my education to launch your career? She looked at me with desperate eyes, searching for some sign of the malleable younger sister she had manipulated for so many years. Amelia. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe we can move forward as a family. Move forward? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Victoria, you didn't just steal money from our parents. You stole 7 years of my life. You stole my relationship with my family, my chance at college, my sense of self-worth. You stole Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations, and the simple comfort of knowing I had people who loved me unconditionally. I looked around the room at the faces of relatives who had avoided me for years, who had whispered about the Collins girl who had stolen from her own family. Some looked ashamed, others shocked, but all of them were finally seeing me as I truly was, the victim, not the villain. And the worst part, I continued, is that you're only sorry because you got caught. If Grandpa Richard hadn't planned this moment, if he hadn't gathered this evidence, you would have been perfectly happy to let me remain the family pariah for the rest of my life. Dad walked over to me, his eyes filled with tears I had never seen before. Amelia, how do we even begin to apologize for this? I looked at him, this man who had raised me and loved me and then threw me away based on lies, and I felt a strange sense of peace. You can't, I said simply. Some things can't be undone with apologies. Victoria stood up, mascara running down her cheeks, her perfect image finally cracking. Please, everyone's watching. My career, my reputation, your reputation. Mom's voice cut through the room like a whip. Your sister lost everything because of your lies? And you're worried about your reputation? I picked up the stack of bank statements and receipts from the box, evidence of Victoria's gambling addiction and her systematic deception. These will be very interesting for your followers to see, I said calmly. The real story behind Victoria Collins style. How you built your empire on money stolen from your own family, then destroyed your sister's life to cover your tracks. Victoria's face went white. You wouldn't. That would destroy everything I've worked for. Everything you've worked for? I repeated. Victoria, you've never worked for anything in your life. You've taken and manipulated and lied your way to success. Maybe it's time you learned what it feels like to lose everything and have to start over. But even as I said it, I realized I didn't want to be the person who destroyed someone else's life, even someone who had destroyed mine. I wasn't Victoria. I wasn't going to use nuclear weapons when precision strikes would do. However, I continued, I'm not you. I'm not going to ruin your life out of spite. But there are conditions if you want me to keep this information private. Victoria nodded eagerly, grasping at this lifeline. Anything. I'll do anything. First, you're going to transfer $50,000 to an education fund that I'll set up. That's roughly what my stolen education cost me. Plus interest for 7 years of delayed career advancement. Done, she said immediately. Second, you're going to make a public apology on your social media platforms. Not the whole story, just an acknowledgement that you made serious mistakes that hurt your family, and that you're taking time away from social media to focus on personal growth and making amends. Victoria's face fell, but she nodded. Her brand was built on perfection and aspiration. Admitting to mistakes would definitely damage her image, but it wouldn't destroy her completely. Third, you're going to enter therapy. Real therapy, not just for show. You have problems that go way beyond stealing money, and you need professional help. She nodded again, tears still streaming down her face. And finally, I said, looking directly at my parents, I want a formal acknowledgement from Mom and Dad that they wronged me, and a commitment that they will never again make assumptions about their children based on favoritism and manipulation. Dad stepped forward immediately. Amelia, we were wrong. Completely devastatingly wrong. We failed you as parents and we failed ourselves as people. There's no excuse for what we did. Mom was sobbing now, her composure finally cracking completely. I don't know how to live with what we've done to you. My baby girl, we threw away our baby girl because we were too blind to see the truth. I felt tears starting in my own eyes. But they weren't tears of joy or relief. They were tears of grief for the family we could have been. For the 7 years that were lost forever. For the innocence that could never be recovered. The thing is, I said softly, I'm not your baby girl anymore. I'm a 25-year-old woman who learned how to take care of herself because she had no choice. I'm not the same person who was thrown out of this house 7 years ago, and you're not the same people who threw her out. I looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of relatives who were processing this dramatic revelation, the grandmother who had orchestrated this moment of truth, the sister who had built her life on lies, and the parents who had chosen the wrong child to believe. I'll accept your apologies, I said, and I'll work with Victoria to make sure she follows through on her commitments. But I need you all to understand that this doesn't mean we're going back to the way things were. Too much has changed, and some bridges can't be rebuilt just because the truth finally comes out. Grandma Rose walked over to me and took my hand in her frail but warm fingers. Your grandfather would be so proud of you, she said quietly. He always said that adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. As I prepared to leave Rose Hill Manor that night, several relatives approached me to apologize for their treatment over the years. To express their admiration for how I had handled the situation. To invite me to future gatherings with genuine warmth. But the interaction that meant the most came from my 7-year-old cousin Emma, who looked up at me with wide eyes and said, "Are you really my cousin Amelia, the one from the stories?" "What stories?" I asked, kneeling down to her level. "Mommy always talks about how smart and brave you were, and how sad it was that you had to go away. She said someday you'd come back and everything would be better." I looked up to see my Aunt Sarah, Mom's sister, who had been sending me those birthday cards and Christmas gifts all these years, not Grandma Rose as I had assumed. She smiled at me through her tears and mouthed, "I never believed it." 3 months later, Victoria followed through on her commitments. The education fund was established. Her public apology was posted and surprisingly well received by her followers, and she entered a residential therapy program for gambling addiction and family trauma. Her influencer career survived, though in a different form. She began focusing on authenticity and mental health advocacy, sharing her journey of recovery and making amends. My parents tried to rebuild our relationship, but it was slow going. We had lunch once a month, awkward affairs where we struggled to find common ground between who we used to be and who we had become. Mom started therapy too, trying to understand how she had failed so completely as a mother. Dad threw himself into researching gambling addiction and family dynamics, as if he could study his way to forgiveness. As for me, I used part of Victoria's payment to enroll in a graduate program in library science, working toward my master's degree while continuing my job at the university. I also started writing, documenting my experiences with family trauma and recovery, finding my voice in a way I never had before. The most unexpected development came 6 months after that Christmas Eve revelation. I received a letter from my grandfather's lawyer, informing me that Richard Collins had left me the bulk of his estate, including Rose Hill Manor and his investment portfolio. Apparently, he had been planning for this moment for years, setting up trusts and legal arrangements that would activate only after the truth came out about the stolen money. "He always said you were the one with real character," Grandma Rose told me when I asked her about it. "He knew that adversity would either make you stronger or break you, and he bet everything on your strength." Standing in the library of Rose Hill Manor a year later, surrounded by thousands of books and the history of generations who came before me, I realized that my grandfather had given me something far more valuable than money or property. He had given me vindication, validation, and the tools to build whatever life I chose. I kept my job at the university but converted part of the manor into a reading retreat for young adults who had experienced family trauma or educational disruption. Victoria, now 2 years into her recovery, became one of the first major donors to the program, using her platform to raise awareness about family dynamics and their long-term effects. We'll never be sisters the way we were as children, but we've found a way to coexist that acknowledges both the harm that was done and the possibility of healing. She still struggles with the temptation to manipulate situations to her advantage, but therapy has helped her recognize these impulses and choose different behaviors. My parents and I have developed what I call a cordial relationship. We exchange holiday cards, attend major family events, and sometimes have pleasant conversations about neutral topics. The love is still there, buried under layers of hurt and mistrust, but it's a different kind of love now. More careful, more conditional, more honest about its limitations. The story could end there, with a neat resolution where justice was served and everyone learned valuable lessons. But real life is messier than that, and healing is an ongoing process rather than a destination. Some days I wake up angry about the 7 years that were stolen from me. Other days I feel grateful for the strength and independence those years taught me. Most days I simply focus on the life I'm building now, using the resources my grandfather left me to create something meaningful and lasting. Last Christmas Eve, I hosted the family gathering at Rose Hill Manor for the first time. Victoria came with her boyfriend, a therapist who specializes in addiction recovery and who seems to genuinely understand her struggles. My parents brought photo albums they had been afraid to look at for 7 years, pictures of a family that had existed before lies tore us apart. As I watched everyone gathered in the same parlor where the truth had finally been revealed a year earlier, I realized that my grandfather's greatest gift wasn't the money or the house or even the vindication. It was the lesson that some truths are worth waiting for, and that character is revealed not in the moments when life is easy, but in how we respond when everything falls apart. I still live alone above the bakery in town most of the time, but now it's a choice rather than a necessity. I have options now, possibilities that extend far beyond the limited vision I had developed during my years of exile. And while I'll never get back those 7 years of lost family connections and delayed dreams, I've learned that sometimes the life you rebuild from ashes is stronger and more authentic than the one that was taken away. The truth didn't set me free all at once. Freedom has been a gradual process of choosing forgiveness over bitterness, growth over stagnation, and hope over resignation. But it did give me something I hadn't had in 7 years. The knowledge that I was never the problem, never the villain, never deserving of the punishment that was inflicted on me. And in the end, that knowledge has been worth the wait.